When I look at our planet and realize that this is the only place that we will ever call home, I can't help but think about the crossroads that civilization now finds itself in. From this perspective, the world seems so peaceful. As we look closer, our world is changing. For me, I think for most people, the real question is, how long is man going to survive on this beautiful planet? For the last 18 months, I've traveled around the world with a film crew in search of the truth about our changing climate and the future of mankind. What I've learned, is whether you believe man is causing the climate to change, or we just happen to be in another natural climate cycle, the fact remains, our climate is changing and it's affecting millions and millions of people in ways that we've never thought possible.
When you get scarce resources, or if you get a change so radical that people can't function, you have huge displacement.
Climate change is on a complete collision course right now with civilization as we know it.
Everything in nature is related, so overpopulation, competition for resources, food, water, energy, all have an impact on each other.
For people who think that climate change isn't to do with them, if they think that, you know, so what if the sea level rises a little bit? I live halfway up the mountain, or I live in the middle of a huge landmass and it's just not going to touch me. Well, they need to ask themselves, do they need to eat food? They need to ask themselves, do they need to drink clean water?
A Pentagon group, after they retired, referred to climate change as a threat multiplier. What it does is it goes on and presses areas already stressed over the brink to a tipping point of social unrest.
Whether or not people are causing it or it's just a natural change of climatic state, it's still in our faces and it's still affecting an awful lot of people right now.
All these reasons are going to create pressures that likely lead to more people moving around the globe unpredictably as those crunches interact.
But the problem is there are 6.5 billion people in the world today, and there are not a lot of places to migrate to, and not many places that welcome migrants, and that's what's new and different.
I think if some of the predictions are true about 50 million people, or God help us, 100 million people coming to the United States from different countries because of climate change, there will be great civil unrest. There'll be shortages of food. There'll be shortages of water. There will be climate wars if that amount of people come here.
I worry about the young men and women of America just in the next decade or two who are increasingly going to be called on to wear the uniform of their nation and to represent us in climate conflicts, in climate wars, as they grow and develop around the world.
The great majority of the human population lives near the sea. Indonesia, a country that will be especially hard hit, about 85% of the population lives within a few miles of the coast. These are relatively steep islands, and so you can't live very far up the hillsides, and so most people live on the coastal plains. It's very, and that's true on many, many island societies. But in Indonesia, you have close to 300 million people living very close to the sea. Sea level rise will imperil them to begin with, and then on top of that, we get severe storms and flooding. So when you get the combination of that, you get a witch's brew in which very large populations have to be on the move. Some of them only temporarily, responding to storms, moving inland and so on, away from tidal surges. Others probably permanently as their societies become increasingly uninhabitable. And some of those can be very, very large indeed. Probably the worst case is Bangladesh. Bangladesh, you have over 150 million people living essentially at sea level. A few live a little bit above sea level, but not many. And so as the sea level begins to rise, and it is a country already hit by serious storms, those serious storms will now get much more dramatic and more frequent, and that combination will make probably the vast part of Bangladesh probably uninhabitable. And we will see literally 100 million people on the move, and they'll be leaving home without American Express cards.
What we see is that the vast increase of the numbers of disasters will need a lot more investment in local capacities, and that's what we're investing in now. So it's not white doctors flying around the world helping people. That's really an old-fashioned image.
So the last cyclone, the Nargis, was formed in the 16 November. So that goes.
The weather has changed. Cyclone Sidr came all at once. I grabbed my baby and ran outside. The current was so fast, too fast. And my baby girl was ripped from my arms. I have never found her body. What kind of mother lets go for a child?
It is a very sorrowful feeling that they could have been saved, but that I couldn't do it. That is a very painful thing in my life.
Bangladesh is basically the ground zero of climate change. For Bangladesh, it's not weather, it's not when, it's happening now.
If you have a 1 meter rise in sea level, which could happen in a matter of decades now, a 1 meter rise in sea level, Bangladesh, a country of 155 million people, would lose 40% of its rice land. What's that going to do to the world's food supply, for example?
We have virtually quadrupled our food production in last 60 years, 4 times higher. Population has also become 4 times higher. And therefore, our food production is just matches with the demand of the people. Any turbulence, any shortfall creates problem, like in 2007 and 2008. We lost about, say, 10% of our food grain, and now we have to import it.
We had the heads of all our major supermarkets, our major food shops, meeting with government saying, we have 3 days worth of food left on the shelves. We are, in effect, 9 meals from anarchy.
You know, this idea that the planet will be destroyed by climate change. No. Planet will not be destroyed by climate change. It's the human civilization that will be destroyed by climate change. It's some human beings will be eliminated by climate change. Now, any human beings which are threatened to be eliminated will not stay still. Our nature is such that we will try and do the best, and that might create discord over which we may not have control.
What will happen to the 10, 20, 30 million people in Bangladesh, for example, who will have to move up countries somewhere else, or indeed outside of the country, in order to be able to continue to survive? The numbers are boggling, and I think our responses at the moment are inadequate in terms of coping with these newly displaced people.
Would they go into India? Will the Indians openly accept them? Would it set up a conflict at the border?
And these are literally millions of Muslims not too welcome in a Hindu and non-Muslim country in vast numbers that don't have the resources to take care of literally many tens of millions of refugees. The important difference between an era when we were dealing with climate change when we were nomadic and today is national borders. 8,200 years ago, there were no nation states. The nation state is an artifact of the last few centuries, and permanent borders are an artifact of the last few centuries. And so people that have to move cannot move beyond their own borders easily.
6 months have passed since Cyclone Sid came through. And as our crew continues farther south toward the southern Bangladesh coast, the destruction seems to be getting worse. And people everywhere just seem to be on the move.
Nature is now at war with us. Cyclone Sidar killed many. Millions and millions are now hungry and homeless. Is this a message from God? I don't know. I am an old, lonely, and scared woman who knows nothing. I pray for the generations to come, the children that must leave Bangladesh to survive.
The crew decided to take a all-night boat trip. It's like 14 hours up the river. And we'd fly out of Dhaka tomorrow and head to the South Pacific. And I can't help but think about this one individual that I met in one of the villages that was flooded yesterday. As we were leaving, he came up to me, and I think he was like probably 7 or 8 years old. And he asked me if I would do him a favor. And the favor was, when I get back to America, would I tell everybody that Bangladesh is not going to survive unless America helps them? Here's a young boy that probably should be thinking about playing soccer, but he's thinking about the survival of his country. When I left Los Angeles to fly to Bangladesh, I told a bunch of my friends who are my age, I don't think half of them could pick out Bangladesh on a map. But this 7-year-old boy, every day, all he thinks about is whether America is going to save his family, his friends, and his country.
If ultimately you lose your nation goes underwater or becomes unlivable, you're not a temporary refugee, you're permanently relocated. And then you have to grapple with the question, what happens to the exclusive economic zone that that country had? What happens if that people have a perfectly understandable desire to carve out a new corner of the world in which they can still think of themselves as a nation? We already understand the deep, lasting and seemingly unsolvable problems of creating a country in the Middle East and all the tensions between Israel and its neighbours. What happens if you get another 30 nations ultimately losing their nationhood and wanting to find a new corner of the world?
And right now the politics is saying, show me the catastrophes. And everybody who's in science is honest, and they say, well, no catastrophe is just due to humans. It's due to a combination of factors. You see, well, when it's just due to humans, we'll do something about it. But by then it's too late. So what we're doing is performing an experiment in a laboratory, except it's laboratory Earth, and we and every other living creature is along for the ride.
Climate change is about upheaval. Upheaval is the enemy of security. So we're going to have to rethink climate change as being some remote environmental issue that the scientists will work out over there, because it's going to touch upon every aspect of our lives.
From a purely intellectual perspective, it's like a puzzle. It's like an incredibly interesting puzzle. How are we going to bring together two things that cannot be brought together? One is national sovereignty, and the other one is the fact that people cross borders all the time, and that we have to deal with that reality.
What sometimes worries me about this process is that it's all about people in suits in conference centers, talking about a global policy response, and the human face of it isn't evident in those negotiations, isn't clear enough. What it's fundamentally all about at the end of the day isn't sufficiently on the minds of the people that are conducting these negotiations.
The president of the Maldives was quoted in the international press a few weeks ago as being willing to explore the idea, if I understood it correctly, of looking for new real estate for his country. And I say that in maybe a very colloquial way, but I think it really raises the question, can you move countries?
We are already seeing a number of these nations trying to negotiate, if you want, alternative places for their populations to move. It's an extraordinary prospect in the sense that in the 21st century we are at a point where whole nations will have to essentially cease to exist.
The most vulnerable groups are the ones that already are marginal because of social and economic grounds, poor islands, small island states. And now you add on top of that rising sea level an increasing likelihood of more intense hurricanes, and their entire future, their entire culture is in jeopardy.
It's estimated with sea level rise that in the coming 20 to 30 years, 42, maybe go up to 50 small island developing states could fully disappear.
We had to spend a couple days in Fiji because our aircraft had mechanical problems. We took off this morning and have pretty much been flying over water the entire time, but now if you look out at that tiny strip of land, that's actually where we're headed, Tuvalu. A country that many people say will be the first country to go completely underwater because of sea level rise.
The scientists told us in the next 10 years, we will be under the water.
Some of the islands, small islands, that been washed away by the current.
Since last time I was here about a month ago, there's definitely a lot more trees that have fallen over up in this northern tip of the island here. It certainly wasn't this significant or dramatic, that's for sure.
Last year, this used to be an island filled with trees and life. Now, it's become part of the vast ocean. It's almost as if the island really never existed.
What's happening in Tuvalu, I think, is a lesson to us in more ways than one. On one hand, the fact that an island whose highest point of land above sea level is just a few meters, the fact that civilization has survived on these shards of land in the remote ocean for so long is a testimony to human resilience and the ability to meet your needs in extreme circumstances. But now, they're a lesson to us about how little things need to change before we shift beyond the point of being able to hold on to our ways of life and our livelihoods.
I'm worried because I've seen traces since. As a mother, I'm worried about my children and my grandchildren. And I know for sure that Tuvaluans have no chance to get out of here as refugees.
Years ago, 20 years ago, nature is a very, very nice friend. But now, nature becomes enemy for our life.
New Zealand offered to take Tuvaluans, but a person like me who is over 45 years old, New Zealand won't be able to take me. We need to go there when we have a job. If we are offered with a job, it's just not automatically just go there. They have criteria, set criteria for people to migrate. They need employment, opportunities to be offered. But an old woman like me, no chance at all.
They say you are poor, you are not educated. That's not fair to me. If they are not, you have to educate this man so that he can learn something for his life. Why they do that? We are the same. Whether you live in part of the world, we are all human beings. No difference. But they classify people that's having a lot of trouble.
As we take off and you kind of, I don't know, really get a good look at just how narrow this country really is. It's unsettling leaving these people here. These people are going to go underwater. And that poor grandmother, because she's over 45 years old, is probably going to have to swim for her life.
I think these are really the human faces of climate change that we should be aware of.
The universe is one family. I mean, we are part of one family. Anything that happens to the human face of another part of the family, anywhere else in the world, is something that's a slap on our faces. And I think we have to be aware of that.
I think we have to have a much better system of helping refugees across the whole planet. What we do right now is pretty miserable.
If you are persecuted on account of your race, your nationality, your ethnic origin, your religion, your membership in a particular social group, your political opinions, you can go to a different country and that country will generally accept that they cannot send you back to be persecuted. But if you flee your village being destroyed because of a tsunami or crops failing and therefore you can't find food for your family, then at that point you don't have any special protections under international law.
We've had lots of civilizations collapse in the past, in part, all of them from environmental causes. And now for the first time we have a totally global civilization that is moving towards collapse for environmental causes in part, and we don't have any system of governance to deal with the entire planet.
Is the present definition of refugee too limited? Have circumstances changed so that we have to think differently about refugees? If we have millions of people who are displaced by changes in climate and they are left homeless, they're left without any real lifeline, then the United Nations has a responsibility toward those people.
Since the 1951 convention, the world has recognized a lot of more nuanced forms of human mobility. There are internally displaced people, people who are under great duress but may not make it across the border. There are people who just barely cross over the border because they're just trying to make it to the next water hole or to the next feeding place, or however you want to think about that. And then there's international migration.
So yeah, at the end of the day, here's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the fact that there's a gap between what the law provides and what the world needs. And the only way we're going to make some headway in closing that gap is to either increase, through human empathy and smart practical thinking, what the law can actually accomplish, or to decrease the needs of the world.
This is not a 100-year or 50-year issue, it's a present issue. And it isn't one of gradual global warming. Indeed, the global mean temperature may be rising, but what we are already beginning to see, and will see with increasing frequency, is more weather extremes, more often, in more places. And by weather extremes, I mean things like extreme storms, I mean extended droughts, I mean big floods. It's all about water. Too much, too little.
That we're facing at the moment is rather nicely summed up by something that Winston Churchill said in a speech in the House of Commons in Parliament in the UK, warning about the perils that were coming. And he said, the era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays, is coming to its close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences.
We've seen just a small sample of this in the United States with Hurricane Katrina, There were, in the beginning, close to 1 million evacuees, we called them. But we now know there are at least 300,000 out of that close to 1 million who are not going back. This is a new situation. We've not faced anything like this before. And this is coming at a time when world population is growing at 70 million a year and projected to continue growing and adding another 3 billion or so by mid-century.
And then we see in our own country that we weren't smart enough to anticipate, to stop the climate change that I think contributed to Katrina and Rita. We have, in effect, environmental refugees in our own country.
It's already happening. I mean, I find the thought unbearable that because of the way we live, people suffer in disasters that they've never experienced before.
I mean, it's hard to even think in terms of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rising sea refugees. The numbers become sort of irrelevant because we can't grasp them. We can now see the effect of 300,000 refugees, climate refugees from New Orleans and the Gulf Coast generally, and most of New Orleans and many of these small towns in the Gulf Coast will never be rebuilt. I mean, for one thing, if you want to build there, you ought to have insurance. But insurance companies are not eager to write insurance policies for new homes built in those areas. So the market is beginning to work against the reconstruction of New Orleans and some of these other small towns on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
You know, last night when Hurricane Ike landed, I was on Galveston Island, smack dab in the middle of the eye of the storm, as they say. The wind sounded as if it came straight from hell. And a wall of water almost 2 stories high slammed into the island, washing entire neighborhoods away, as if they were matchsticks.
The strict constructionists, who mostly are political scientists, and they're decent people, say we do not want to make a refugee anything other than a victim of political violence or a dictator or something like that, because what it would do is degrade the status of refugee to include so many more that we'd run out of resources and we'd be defining so many people into it we wouldn't know where to begin. So they try to have this narrow view. A refugee is created by a political situation beyond their control. Others have said a refugee is simply a person who's been displaced from their home and their livelihood by some set of events, and those events can be the old kind, the political chicanery, but they could also be environmental disasters and floods and hurricanes and fires and lack of capacity to grow food. So why shouldn't they all be called refugees and all dealt with by refugee aid? I'm personally in agreement with the broader definition, but I can understand why some political scientists are worried that if we get so broad, the countries of the world won't respond with adequate resources and they'll just shrug and say the problem is hopeless. So they want to keep it focused narrowly so they can deal with the political refugees. I think we have to be more moral than that and deal with the whole spectrum.
Many experts have debated whether or not we need a new international framework or law in order to help people who are on the move because of environmental reasons, especially climate change, since that's such an acute driver, or whether climate refugees or environmentally induced migrants could fit underneath the Geneva Convention, which was established in 1951.
It's too late, really, to help a person effectively once the event has happened. That's why our emphasis is at the moment on trying to find ways in which we can preempt the phenomenon of becoming a refugee as a result of these environmental changes. Where it does occur, I think both with our colleagues in UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, but also in many of the other instruments that the UN has available, we are thinking at the moment about how we will deal with the phenomenon of environmental migration and at its extreme end also environmental refugees. Clearly the numbers are going to grow. We are not prepared for it either institutionally nor necessarily in terms of norms and standards of international cooperation.
will be a huge challenge for many communities, especially if the particular land that you used to live on will be gone. If for example, like in SCHWARTZ-Founder, the island in which they're living now and where their dead are buried is eventually going to go under, there will be a huge temptation by many community members to kind of move the deceased.
Move in our cemetery and stuff like that. I mean, yes, it would be nice to do it, but I think we put them to rest, and they're resting.
It's not just a piece of real estate that goes under. It's a highly cultured landscape that has a lot of meaning and significance for the people, and it contains the bodies of their ancestors. It contains a number of archaeological and cultural artifacts, which are all important for their sense of identity and their sense of history.
Everything we fought for back in the days is all going to be gone. Could all be gone in one storm. A whole village, community, tribe can be gone. And how is my kids gonna relate that to their kids? I just hope they can tell the story. I hope that we don't get a bad enough storm that, nobody makes it out.
The latest data on climate change, the observed trends, tell us that from August 2008, there's 100 months left before the world enters a new, more perilous phase of global warming, after which it becomes pretty much a game of climate roulette about whether or not we'll be able to stop runaway climate change.
Last year, in October, the Navy released a new national maritime strategy, integrating the strategies of the Navy, Marines, and the Coast Guard. I helped write that strategy. The number 2 priority after avoiding war with China is dealing with the humanitarian consequences of climate change. The one that, for example, troubles me most is what is going to happen to the river systems of Asia. That is that most of the great river systems of Asia flow from one single source, and that is the glaciers of Tibet. The glaciers are retreating fast. And now you have the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, the Yangtze, the Yellow, all beginning to dry up from that. That's almost 3 billion people's water supply. Almost half the earth depends upon that for water.
Now there's another set of refugees that's being generated as population pressures build and grasslands turn into desert. We see the deserts expanding.
Since 1994, the Gobi Desert has swallowed 25,000 square miles of farmland. This desert is now within 100 miles of Beijing. Millions have fled, giving birth to environmental ghost towns and temporary housing, known in China as ecological government housing.
I am sad because I miss my family living together. My family had to split up because there weren't enough crops. In old life, we were poor. But nature wasn't bad. But now, nature has gotten worse. It forced us to run like animals in search of water.
We know that with each 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, that grain yields on average decline about 10%, yields of wheat, rice, and corn. What would the world be like when China is competing with us for our grain supply, which is almost inevitable now? I mean, it'd be tempting to say that 1.3 billion Chinese, we're not going to let them compete, with us for our grain supply. The problem is China's our banker now. They're the ones financing the U.S. fiscal deficit every year. So there's a limit to what you can do, what you can say to your banker.
Humans use the resources they have. So mountain glaciers, which then give them water, are all part of the resources for irrigation, for drinking, for other things they need. The trouble is that while the mountains go through melt phase, they actually get more of a risk of flood. The snowpack's now melting about 2 weeks earlier and more rapidly than it did 100 years ago. So it's ironic. You have a higher probability of drought in the summer when it doesn't rain and when you desperately need the water you saved in the reservoirs, and a higher probability of flood in the earlier spring because you get that surge of melt. So when you live high in the Andes or high in the Himalayas, you're in the moment facing more risk from flooding as those historic glaciers that took hundreds, if not thousands of years to build are melting at unprecedented rates.
It's been raining ever since we arrived in Liaoqiu. We're now headed to the southern part of the Guangxi province. Last night after dinner, I overheard a couple of the crew in conversation trying to figure out what would be worse for mankind, man causing all of this destruction or nature. As they went back and forth, and granted, none of these guys are scientists or climatologists, but they all kind of came to the consensus that we'd probably be better off if man was causing all of this destruction. They all kind of agreed that if man wasn't causing this, and this was a natural climatic cycle that was causing this mass migration, how in the heck were we supposed to fix it?
Giant flood destroyed our rice fields. We have nothing to eat, no house to sleep in. This tent is my home. The storm came at night. It was quickly higher than our rooftops. I swam to my daughter's home, but it was gone. Their bodies have never been recovered. I used to feed the village with my rice fields. Now I give them empty rice bowls. I am a failure to my own people. Just a failure to my own people.
I think, first of all, if you talk about carbon loading of the atmosphere, you have a much easier conversation because it's so clearly visible that it's happening in terms of scientific data, and it is so clear that it's going to happen more if we go down the current path with China, India, and other countries modernizing in the pattern of the last 100 years, which is massive use of unregulated fossil fuels.
We're on a track to a planetary sustainability train wreck because we are emitting greenhouse gases above the highest projection from the UN.
China will add 2.5 times the U.S. coal burning capacity in the next 8 years. This year, Asia, continental Asia, passed the United States as a car market for the first time.
While many people would argue that population is the major driver of climate change and other environmental issues, what we really have to look at is economic growth, and that is as we have a larger and larger population that is wealthier and wealthier, they demand more energy, they demand more natural resources, which puts pressure on the climate system. So between now and the year 2050, the population will go up from about 6.5 billion people to about 9, a 50% increase. But the world GDP is likely to go up by a factor of 4. So it's a combination of the number of people and the ability to purchase energy and other resources.
People like to blame big business. Oh, it's that oil company with a couple of X's in its name who had record profits. Well, it's true they had record profits. But who bought their stuff? Us. So yeah, these businesses have their culpability. But we want to drive monster vehicles. We don't want to put our cars on a diet. We want a second home. We don't sit there and put the energy and effort into buying more efficient computers, more efficient light bulbs, more efficient refrigerators and cars. Then we're part of the problem too.
Countries that are in the early stages of transition to wealth are not going to postpone for a generation people having a good life because of an environmental concern. And so environmental strategies can't be tailored to the 2 or 3 richest countries in the world, because they won't work on the rest of the planet.
So as long as we and the companies that get rich selling to our greed continue the same business as usual course, we're headed to, if we're very, very lucky, several more degrees warming, and if we're unlucky, 5 to 10. If we hit the latter, we're going to see a very different world. It's a world unlike any that human civilization has seen.
Flying over Lake Chad, you can see just how vast the dried lake bed is. There's something like 14,000 square miles have turned from water to desert. What was once a great lake that supplied water for its 4 bordering countries now finds itself fighting for survival.
We think it's just only God, and both God, because if there's, the God make the climate. So actually we just think all the solution is just from the God, as we think. But we don't think about the human, how can cause about that. Many people now, they have lived and moving down on the other side, going on the other, on the other side, asking whether there's water.
What's happening across Africa from Senegal and Mauritania in the west, all the way across to Somalia in the east, is that the herders are being forced southward into the agricultural areas. And we're seeing this all across Africa.
So because drought is such a problem in the area, then water potentially is the source of quite a few conflicts in the region. One of the issues is that the main water sources, so the dams, the IRC recently did a survey, about 80% of the dams we found were either fully or partially silted up, which means they're not working properly, so they're not storing as much water. So already scarce resources are even scarcer for the people there. So this is creating conflicts between people who want the water for human needs and people who want the water for cattle.
If we were to see what's going to happen to Africa, by 2020, as early as that, we would have about 75, anywhere from 75 to 250 million people who would be affected by water stress as a result of climate change. Which is not to say that you don't have water stress in Africa today, you have it on a large scale.
At the moment, Europe is spending millions to defend itself against immigration from Africa. Where are those 250 million people going to go? Can they be stopped at the borders of Europe? And what are they going to do to try and get in anyway?
I think there are relatively few bad, truly bad people in the world. There are lots of desperate people. And I think that one of the profound consequences of global climate change is that the number of desperate people is going to increase dramatically. And these will be prey to the truly bad people.
A lot of men had been migrating away to earn money to send back to the family. Women, children, and elderly people were left behind. And human traffickers had apparently seen that pattern of vulnerability and had begun to prey on those people who were left behind, which is an indication to me that we need to know a lot more about the links between vulnerability and climate change. People shouldn't have to be enslaved because of climate change. And yet it seems that these kinds of stressors are pushing people to the extremes of existence.
So to me, what is happening in Chad, in Darfur, currently in Congo, these are signs, symptoms of things to come.
Many people think that Darfur is, in a sense, the first climate civil war or war, whatever you call it in the end.
We now find ourselves at an intersection. An intersection that has overpopulation, overconsumption, lack of resources, and a changing climate, all colliding with each other for the first time.
I find those Sudanese women have a lot of dignity. They will not talk very easily about what they went through. They could say others went through those things, but you know that they also had to go through it.
Please, just take a look at Sudan. God willing, many organizations will help us.
Darfur for them was was not a paradise. If not, they would not have gone away. So what they escaped is from hell.
Why is God doing this to Sudan?
Remember, many of these women we hear have also been raped, so they are traumatized, and especially, as you know, it is in a Muslim culture, so it must be extremely difficult for them.
You could say, well, but what about the dignity? What I have never seen, and don't take it as a joke, it's true. If you go to a refugee camp and you tell them, you know what, your mortality rate is very good, I can assure you that you will not put a smile on the face of the refugees because you can tell them that their mortality rate is good. You have to be very, very sensitive. Each and every one of those individuals, you should see them as your brother, your sister, your son, or your daughter.
I would like somebody to tell me of one conflict in the world that is not over resources, because there are too many of us, over 6 billion plus, and there is only so much land. There is only so much water. There is only so much resources on the planet. And as we continue to compete, conflicts will continue to mount. But when they come, we say it is ethnicity. So in Darfur, we say it's the Arab tribes fighting the African tribes. It is Muslims fighting Christians. It is this tribe fighting the other tribe. But essentially what is happening here is that we are competing over limited resources.
There was an economist maybe 200 years ago named Malthus. And Malthus had the idea that as human population grew and as natural resources, particularly food, was limited, that people would either die of disease or get in battles and then they'd kill each other all off. So this kind of Malthusian idea of climate wars has come up again and again.
So we already have a world with powder kegs distributed throughout, having nothing to do with the environment. Now we come along, we degrade the land, we change the climate.
The threat of refugees as a consequence of climate change is an enormous national security issue. They will be in a highly unstable state where any number of things can happen. They become more prone to being solicited for acts of terror. They can destabilize governments. They become a huge problem in terms of the spread of disease, other kinds of things that happen. It's highly unstabilizing in an already unstable part of the world.
And I think the fact that the Norwegian Nobel Committee gave last year's Nobel Peace Prize to the IPCC and Mr. Al Gore is a clear reflection of the fact that they see the link between climate change and danger to peace.
About 4 years ago, maybe 5, we were asked by the Pentagon to undertake a study of climate change's national security impacts. This was the first time that they had thought about that.
Well, look, when the Pentagon begins to think about what might happen as a result of issues that have historically been understood to be domestic, like environmental regulation, that's a clear indication that we have to start taking something seriously.
A study of this sort has nothing to do with U.S. climate policy, has nothing to do with the White House, has everything to do with contingency planning for the military.
If we had 500 million people that become climate refugees, you're really asking for catastrophic conditions. But on the other hand, if you had just maybe 50 million in some parts of the world, that may be enough to spark a world war.
It will inevitably be the case that climate refugees move to the next nearest available place, which will be probably other developing countries, the large populous developing countries. Now, those countries are already having a hard time. You add the burden of dealing with large influxes of population, and you're going to see a global domino effect of stresses and strains, of conflicts and flashpoints, which will inexorably and inevitably find its way to the doors of countries in Europe and North America.
I'm not optimistic. It's so huge. It's so big that's coming our way. It's almost beyond comprehension.
I mean, consider the concerns we have in this country about a few million people crossing the border from Mexico. They'll get lost. I mean, they'll be trivial by comparison with the people migrating from Africa, from India and Bangladesh, Vietnam, China. As climate change creates uninhabitable situations, even refugees from within the United States. I mean, a 3-meter rise in sea level in Florida is what, half the size it is today. Florida is one of our most populous states. Where are those people going? Some of them are going to Indianapolis. I mean, they'll go anywhere they can find a place.
People certainly worry about the effects in their particular area. There are going to be more hurricanes, more tornadoes in Tornado Alley. I live in the Gulf Coast. How's that going to affect me? There are going to be more mudslides in California because of all the rain. And all those are real concerns, and that is going to be part of it. But a much larger concern is, the estimates of the amounts of people that are going to come to this country.
It makes perfect sense that countries in conflict will move to countries with no conflict. But once they arrive in those countries with no conflict, like North America and Europe, those countries are soon going to find themselves in conflict. How will America handle all this? More importantly, how are you going to handle all of this?
So either a country like the United States is going to have to offer up some of its space to take climate refugees, or the quid pro quo would be, if they didn't want to take 30, 40, 50 million climate refugees, they should be offering up the financial and other resources to enable other countries to be able to absorb climate refugees without the absorption of those climate refugees creating ungovernable states, because they're overwhelming the infrastructure, they're overwhelming what any government can deal with. But it's one thing or the other.
You could set up a quota system, you would say. People would have to take on board, people would have to welcome refugees according to the quota of past emissions. So if the United States have contributed 25% to the change in the atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, we would have to take up 25% of all the refugees. I think this is a fair suggestion, actually. Yeah? It would simply be one man, one vote, one emission, one refugee, and so on.
As the list of failing states grows longer, the question becomes, how many failing states before we have a failing civilization?
This is not a distant threat. This will affect your life today and tomorrow. It will affect, and it already is affecting, the price of food you're putting on the table for your family and your children. It will affect the price of energy that you pay for your home and your automobile. It will affect whether your children have to go to war or you have to go to war. It will affect what the cost of living here is in America more generally. It will affect our ability to protect our own borders.
So there's the idea that it's someone else's house that's burning, not mine. Everyone's house is going to be on fire. There's no way of stopping this and localizing it.
No threat is greater than this. It will happen. The other big threats like nuclear proliferation and radical terrorism and so on are all contingent threats. None of them has the potential to change the fate of humankind. Climate change does.
I do think that if we would go on like we do now, towards resource depletion, towards devastating environmental change, towards overpopulation in many parts of the world, then I think we could reach such a pre-stage of global anarchy in the next 50 years.
There's a famous poster from wartime Britain which pictures a typical middle-class living room, a man sitting in his armchair holding his pipe, children around his feet, and one of his children looks up to him and says, "What did you do in the war, Daddy?" It was a way of trying to rouse people's sense of responsibility, that they too should be fighting the good fight in the war. I worry that in 50 years' time, future generations are going to turn around and say, "What did you do in the climate war? What did you do to try to make sure that I would have a world fit and peaceful and decent to grow up in?" When I turn around and look at my own daughter now, try as I might with all the work that we're doing, I look at her and think, we are not doing enough. We are not bringing about the change that we need to bring about to preserve a decent future for you. And I've run out of words at that point.
A parent or grandparent who loses a child on the battlefield in a climate war that never needed to be fought will feel in a profound, personal way the loss associated with our failure to act and our failure to go green.
How did we get in this mess? Too many of us demanding ever increasing traditional standards of living. That means too much consumption. Not sharing with people who then think they need it too, and not investing enough to invent our way out of the problem. Every single one of those factors, population, affluence, technology, and political will, can all be fixed if we want to.
We're at a point now where the challenge is no longer to save the planet. The challenge now is to save civilization itself. And that is not a spectator sport. We all have to be involved.
The only way that we can deal with the problem of environmental refugees is through prevention of the problem.
The key here is to take the steps now to deal with some of these issues so that we don't run out of the water, so that we don't disrupt the capacity for growing food and the other things we need to do. And that takes planning and leadership.
If you're a climate skeptic, I hope and pray you're right, because if you stop us taking the actions we need to go to a low carbon economy because of your skepticism, you will have ruined the Earth for several generations or most generations in the future.
So the climate clock is now ticking very, very loudly. And if we want to not play that game of climate roulette, we need to be seeing rapid, dramatic cuts in greenhouse gases in the advanced industrialized countries like Britain and the US.
I believe that you incentivize change dramatically faster than you punish change. We did not get to the Transcontinental Railroad by raising taxes on the stagecoach. We got to the Transcontinental Railroad by having huge rewards for building a railroad. We didn't get to the use of airmail as a subsidy to build airlines by punishing railroads. We got to it because we made it so desirable to run an airline that lots of people went out and started their own airline.
We know that we can address this issue provided we address it in a balanced way around the world. If we address it in a way that only creates economic distortions, only causes companies to move from the United States to China or from Europe to India, basically nothing will be solved. We'll just be creating emissions in a different place.
Waste is the product of faulty design. If we design the system right, there won't be any waste. And that's the challenge.
we can have a big effect in how we use our water around the world in radically reducing the amount of water that we use to irrigate fields by very small upgrades in technology. This isn't really high tech or anything like it. I mean, it's just slight changes in irrigation technology, and we can have a huge impact.
In the Algerian desert, there's enough harnessable solar energy to power the world economy. Now, it almost sounds like a mistake, but I mean, another way of saying that is that the amount of sunlight striking the Earth in 1 hour will power the world economy for 1 year. Or in the US, DOE back in 1991 pointed out that North Dakota, Kansas, and Texas have enough harnessable wind energy to satisfy national electricity needs. And, you know, when they came out with this, we all said, wow. But in retrospect, it was a gross underestimate because it was based on the wind turbine technologies in 1991. To get 40% of the world's electricity from wind, we would need to build and install 1.5 million wind turbines between now and 2020. Sounds like a lot, but we already have over 100,000 wind turbines in operation, so it would be a 15-fold increase. 1.5 million wind turbines is not a lot in terms of manufacturing capacity. We produce 65 million cars every year. We're talking about 1.5 million wind turbines over the next dozen years. We could produce those wind turbines in idled automobile assembly plants in the United States alone.
We can meet this challenge. We can transition to a low carbon economy. We didn't even know about computers 50, 60 years ago. Today, we can't even imagine society without computers. We can't imagine society without internet. We can't imagine it without the modern drugs. Why are we still producing our energy and using it in the same way we did 100 years ago?
The young people I see here at Stanford really do care. They're not just careerists out to get the maximum amount of income. They routinely turn down jobs in some industries which they think would produce products that they don't believe in. And that gives me a great deal of hope.
I'm optimistic about the future of humanity and the future of the planet because I've seen an unprecedented increase in awareness about issues like climate change, the extent of knowledge, particularly among young people.
We can invent our way out of this problem with a few $1 trillion in investment over a period of time. And that sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't, because the world economy every year now grows $1 trillion. That's an extra add-on of $1 trillion every year. So if it costs us $1 trillion over decades to fix this problem, it's 1/10 of the growth rate. What kind of moral people are we? Let's get on with the job.
Do what you can today. What can you do today? Can you buy an energy efficient light bulb? Can you buy 2 or 5? Do that. Can you put some weather stripping around your doors and windows? Good. Do that. Can you buy an energy saving thermostat? Good. Do that. Can you ride a bike when weather and fitness permit? Absolutely. Do that. Is there public transportation near you? Yes. Do that. Home gardening, home composting, all those things that I mentioned are dirt cheap. Very inexpensive, every single thing I said, and you will save money from that. And then if you want, if you enjoy the fruits of your labor and the money that you're saving, maybe then you want to move up the ladder and buy a solar oven. Maybe you then want to buy a rain barrel to collect your rainwater. Lots of electricity is used to pump water around California and anywhere. So you can bit by bit save electricity, you can save water, you can do all these things by doing it in the right order, by starting small and doing something today. But we must all act now.
Now is a moment of opportunity. This is not a threat. This really is a moment of opportunity.
It's a last call for humanity. It's really, we have to bring all our talents, our commitments, our spirits, our solidarity together to address this in full force.
We don't have an option whether or not we can act. So why not do it now?
It's very, very difficult to think about how to answer the question that will be asked, which is, why didn't you do something when there was still time?
And so far, the best answer that they're going to get is, well, we wanted to leave you richer and you'd figure out what to do with it. And that's what you'll hear from the opponents of climate policy. We're moral. We're leaving our grandchildren richer. What about the extinction of species, the destruction of culture, the diversity of culture and nature? If anything is wealth on this planet, it's that.
And the single most important thing is for each of us to become politically active.
Form a political organization to send a message from strength, not just one of you, to the political world that you're expecting them to make a difference on sustainability agenda.
I think that because it became a right-left fight, we frankly just got paralyzed, and I think that's wrong. We ought to be able to come together, not red versus blue, but in a red, white, and blue way.
It's really more like a wartime mobilization than anything else. And I take a lot of encouragement from what happened in this country in 1942. President Roosevelt gave a State of the Union address in which he laid out arms production goals. He said, we're going to produce 45,000 tanks, 60,000 planes, 20,000 artillery guns, and thousands of ships. People were staggered by these numbers. No one had ever seen numbers like this before. Roosevelt and his colleagues realized was that at that time, the largest concentration of industrial power in the world was in the U.S. automobile industry. So after his State of the Union address, when he laid out the arms production goals, he called in the leaders of the industry and said, because you guys represent such a large share of our industrial capacity, we're going to rely heavily on you to help us reach these arms production goals. They said, well, Mr. President, we're going to do everything we can, but it's going to be a real stretch to produce cars and all these arms too. He said, you don't understand. We're going to ban the sale of private cars in the United States. And that's exactly what happened. From the beginning of April 1942 until the end of 1944, nearly 3 years, there were essentially no cars produced in the United States, and we exceeded every one of those arms production goals. So it didn't take decades to restructure the U.S. industrial economy. It didn't take years. We did it in a matter of months. If we could do that then, we can restructure the world energy economy now.
Where you live, in a big country or a small island, we are the same. Human race, no difference. If they suffer, we are suffer too. No difference. Men made by God, the same. But the principle, love one another. That's the principle. Whatever, different in color, different in language, different in custom, but we are one. Love one another. Tell the leaders of the world to think about us, because we are human. We have to survive.
So in the end, much like as in the beginning, what is the fate of mankind? As history looks back at our time, will we have solved the challenges of 10 billion people living in a crowded world with limited resources and a changing climate? Or will our children be forced to survive in a world much more hostile than the one we live in? I believe that we are the people that future generations have been waiting for.